Welcome to today's Explainer. So, we're diving into a topic today that actually takes us on a pretty wild ride. We're going to start with a super persistent viral internet rumor, and then we're going to scale that all the way up to a massive, very real global crisis. We are talking about rainwater harvesting. Now, I know it sounds incredibly simple, right? Like almost mundane. Just put a bucket outside when it rains. But the way we capture and manage rain is quite literally a matter of human survival, infrastructure, and the entire future of our environment. So let's just jump straight into it and clear up some really major misconceptions right off the bat. Okay, so is it illegal to collect rainwater? Look, if you spent practically any time at all on social media, you have absolutely seen this idea floating around. It's this incredibly stubborn urban legend that everyday citizens here in the US are getting arrested or hit with these massive, life-ruining fines, literally just for putting small rain barrels in their backyards. And, it sparks instant outrage. It gets shared tens of thousands of times because it paints this really grim picture of a tyrannical government cracking down on innocent gardeners. But guys, here's the absolute truth. For the vast, vast majority of people, small-scale residential collection is not only completely legal, it's actually highly encouraged. So where on earth did this whole rumor even come from? Well, the internet outrage almost always points back to one highly misunderstood case from 2012. It involved an Oregon man named Gary Harrington. Now, the myth claims that he was hauled off to jail for having a little rain barrel hooked up to his gutters. But the reality? Yeah, he definitely wasn't penalized for a modest roof barrel. The guy had actually constructed 3 massive, completely unauthorized dams on his property. I mean, we are talking about heavy-duty, earth-moving construction here, not a cheap plastic tub you just pick up from the local hardware store. To really wrap our heads around why the government stepped in, we have to look at what those dams were actually doing to the environment. Harrington's unauthorized dams were physically intercepting natural streams and just massive amounts of runoff. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just extra water. This was water legally allocated to downstream users and the local ecosystem. So the really crucial takeaway here is that this was never about punishing a guy for trying to be eco-friendly. It was entirely about community impact. When you build massive unauthorized dams, you are actively cutting off the water supply that your neighbors, local agriculture, and the surrounding natural habitats literally rely on to survive. And that brings us to the actual legal framework governing all of this. In a lot of Western U.S. states, water rights operate under something called the prior appropriation doctrine. Basically, this law dictates that water entering a natural waterway is a public resource. It belongs to everyone. So the entire goal of this legal doctrine isn't to stop you, the everyday citizen, from capturing a little bit of rain for your tomatoes. Not at all. Its purpose is to prevent the unauthorized obstruction of natural water paths. It exists precisely to protect the environment and to make sure there's equitable access for all the communities living further downstream who are completely dependent on that exact same water flow. So, zooming out from all that legal jargon for a second, the core message we really need to take away from these standards is how vital it is to treat water as a finite, precious asset. These legal frameworks, whether you agree with every single application of them or not, they fundamentally exist to ensure fair access and to stop the degradation of our natural resources. Because, let's be honest, for way too long, we've had this bad habit of treating water as an inexhaustible commodity. We think it's just something we can turn a tap to, get forever, without even a second thought. But treating water like it's infinite, that is exactly what leads to the rampant mismanagement and environmental degradation we are seeing all across the globe today. Which leads us perfectly into our current reality. Billions. That is the number we really need to focus on right now. Because while we just talked about the laws preventing the hoarding of water, the tragic irony is that on a macro scale, we are wasting it on an unfathomable level. Think about this. During every single monsoon season, billions of liters of fresh, highly usable rainwater flow straight through our urban streets, wash right over our concrete, and dump directly into the sea, almost entirely uncaptured. It's a staggering, almost heartbreaking loss of a resource that we literally just established is a finite, precious asset. And honestly, this just brilliantly illustrates the paradox we're trapped in right now. Because we lack the necessary infrastructure for large-scale storage, and because we frankly lack the policy framework to use that runoff to recharge our rapidly depleting groundwater, we end up suffering from 2 extreme disasters at the exact same time. By treating water this carelessly, we set ourselves up for incredibly severe impacts. I'm talking brutal cycles of scarcity and drought during the dry seasons, followed immediately by devastating uncontrolled flooding during the wet seasons. The rain itself is absolutely not the problem here. The issue lies 100% in our lack of planning and management. But hey, the good news is that if we actually prioritize water stewardship today, we can drastically alter this future. And it basically boils down to a three-pronged approach. First up, groundwater recharge. We desperately need systems that deliberately direct runoff from our roofs, our roads, and our farms straight back into the ground to replenish our shrinking aquifers. Second, infrastructure investment. We've got to develop localized storage solutions. That is exactly how we transform floodwater from a chaotic, destructive force into a safely stored, highly valuable resource. And finally, third, policy reform. We need to establish a national vision that formally views water as a critical, protected asset. Doing that will naturally encourage massive conservation rather than tremendous waste.
Now, this whole concept of restoring Earth's cycles integrates restorative urbanism beautifully with regenerative agriculture. Just imagine a system where high-tech urban water storage and solar power setups perfectly, seamlessly feed into local agricultural systems. Rainwater gets captured, it's stored safely, and it's actually utilized, right? Meanwhile, any agricultural runoff naturally infiltrates the deep soil to recharge a vibrant groundwater ecosystem down below. We're talking about an underground water table so clean that fish can actually thrive in it. It showcases a complete, closed-loop, clean water cycle, where human habitation and nature aren't fighting each other, but are actively supporting one another through really smart integrated harvesting and storage.
Ultimately, achieving water security is a collective responsibility. It is not just on the farmers, and it's definitely not just on city planners. It's on every single one of us. We have to start treating every drop of water as a vital national treasure. By adopting the smarter harvesting techniques we've explored throughout this explainer, and by promoting sustainable management from the simplest backyard rain barrel all the way up to massive civic infrastructure, we can drastically reduce the terrible damage caused by urban floods and ensure that clean, usable water remains available for generations to come. So, I want to leave you with a pretty powerful thought to consider before we wrap up. Do you believe we should prioritize rainwater conservation as an actual national security issue? It's a heavy question, right? But it really challenges us to stop seeing rain as just weather and start recognizing it as the absolute foundation of our stability and our future. I really encourage you to think deeply about this, consider what steps we can take in our own communities, and spread the word. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep learning.